Everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to present our speakers to you. We have Drew Schweppe, Head of Global Ops at SearchTide. And fun fact, in 2021, he recruited, hired, and onboarded 70 people to a company in just 3 weeks.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And we also have Anna Shcherbyna, hiring expert and CEO of Remotivate. She has personally conducted thousands of interviews and hired for 6, 7, and 8-figure businesses.
Thank you for the intro. And yeah, I'll share a little bit more later, but super glad to be here and really excited about the topic we're going to cover.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here too. I'm Lauren. I'm a marketer and growth hacker, and my goal for today is just to spark a conversation with Anna and Drew that will give you actionable tips that you can use for your companies. I also work at Remotivate, where we help companies like yours hire expert remote leadership. And I'm also happy to share that we're offering an exclusive 15% discount on our services for today's attendees. So that's you, who book a call with us by the end of this week, or the end of next week. But that's enough about Remotivate. No one wants to hear that right now. Let's dive into how to streamline your company's operations to enable faster growth. And just to give a quick overview, the topics that we'll cover today include understanding your operational roadblocks, how to hire better operations experts faster, and how to leverage your operations to enable long-term success and growth. And then last but not least, we'll end this chat with a live Q&A where we'll take questions from the audience. So everyone ready? Let's dive right in. So first, let's start with the basics. So just give us a quick overview. What is operations and why is it so important to a business? So whoever wants to kick this off, just jump right in.
Drew, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So operations is basically the internal workings of any business. It's like anything that is required, that you have to make systems for to produce your product or service or a deliverable. And it's basically how the behind the scenes works. Anna, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that one of the biggest factors of hiring an operations manager, or why a lot of our clients, for example, come to us and say, hey, we need an operations manager, is really they've hit a certain ceiling when it comes to growth, and they really need to be able to level up and continue growing without the house burning down, so to speak. And I think that's a huge factor. Is it's not just when things are going wrong, but it's like also hitting a ceiling in growth, and you want to be able to grow faster and just, yeah, a lot better, I'd say. So that's one thing. And the other thing I also want to add is a lot of companies come in and say, hey, we want to scale the business from 7 to 8 figures, 8 to 9 figures. And I think a good operations manager or head of operations or COO, there's a lot of different names to it. Ultimately, one of the biggest things that they can bring to the table is help a company scale faster as well. By cleaning up all of the day-to-day things and bringing in strategy to the table, the company is really enabled to grow so much faster. Yep.
So I know, Anna, you've told me that a lot of agencies take a really long time to fill this kind of role. So it sounds like it's a really urgent role to fill. So why do you think this is?
I'd say that it can be a little bit challenging to vet the proper candidate. So if you think about hiring a designer, there's a very clear understanding of looking at somebody's portfolio, or even a writer, looking at how somebody writes or how somebody designs, and you can clearly see when somebody's doing a really good job or not a good job, right? I mean, you know what you want to see and you know what to expect. When it comes to operations or even leadership positions in general, I feel like quite a lot of leadership positions have this challenge. You don't know what to look out for. It's like, what is a good operations manager? And I think a lot of business owners that actually do come our way, the question is, well, what is this person even going to be doing? Yes, I understand they're going to clean house and they're going to bring in the systems and processes, but what do I actually check for? Like, what do I ask? What do I check for? How do we vet? And I think that's where the challenge really comes in, and really having a good vetting system to bring in the right person.
Yeah, it sounds like it can be a tough one. So do you want to add something, Drew?
Yeah, sure. I think just also it's really all about the fit, because a lot of founders, at the end of the day, if you're coming into a startup environment or, a high growth tech company, like as the operations person, you're basically just fulfilling whatever the vision of the founders or the company is. And it has to be a good fit for like your working relationship, but it also has to be a good fit for your skill set. And a lot of founders, I would imagine, try to get people that are experts in whatever they sell, but it's really like more of a jack of all trades to a point.
Yeah, it sounds like it can be challenging to find the right person for that. But I guess before we go back deeper into those challenges, let's talk about just operational challenges in general. So what would you say are like top 3 operational mistakes or challenges that companies face, particularly marketing and advertising agencies?
So I guess I would say having a bad or non-existent onboarding process for both like clients and your team is really dangerous, because it's like, okay, we know we need these people to fulfill these roles so we can fulfill our deliverables for our clients. But if you just hire a bunch of people and then you get here, like you're just scrambling, and that is not a good look. So that's one. And you want to go back and forth?
I'd say one of the biggest challenges is not having clear expectations set out. And this is not just for this person, this is for the entire team. I've worked with a business that was 8 figures. They were at like $40 million. And one of the biggest challenges they had, and why they had to continuously let people go, is because they weren't meeting expectations. But when asked if expectations or KPIs were provided or communicated, the answer was no. So there's a huge churn rate because expectations weren't properly set, or KPIs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, with that, it's also like regularly auditing your systems gets overlooked a lot, like something that used to work, or, I actually saw a definition. We were talking about what operations is a couple months ago. I saw one post on LinkedIn that operations was like the most important junk drawer that you have. And like, I love that because it's hilarious, but it's also the opposite of what you want, So constantly cleaning out that junk drawer is so important. And I think people just like, oh, this is, you get removed from the people doing the work and the people running, like the project managers and stuff sometimes, which is dangerous. So not being in touch with like your more frontline workers, I would say, is like my third one, is just not auditing, and then not actually having conversations with like a feedback loop can be really detrimental to your entire company.
It sounds
Sorry, if you don't mind, I want to add a fourth one, because I think this is so valuable as well. I think a lot of companies, what was I going to say? It's like they focus on growth so extensively that they don't focus on actual service delivery and what's happening on the inside of the business that delivers on the service, right? So they're so focused on bringing new clients and selling and running ads. When it comes to actually delivering on a good service, especially for a marketing agency, but this is for anything, for e-commerce as well, that can be such a big issue, because founders often are thinking about growth versus actually quality and really putting out a good product or service. And that's where an operations manager comes in. That's a huge challenge that they're fixing. They're coming in and they're focusing on all of that delivery. So it's not just the systems and processes, onboarding, taking care of staff, but it's like making sure that the ship is running, because somebody let go of the wheel. No one's steering the ship anymore. So
Definitely.
that's a big one, I'd say.
Yeah, like when you're growing that junk drawer, you can't just keep tossing things into it without keeping it organized. I know we've done that in my little kitchen junk drawer, perfectly organized, and then what do you know, a couple months later I open it and wow, what happened? There's so much more stuff in here.
So I mean, that would be a really mean but really great way to vet like a candidate. Would be like, hey, thanks for interviewing with me. Do you mind opening the drawer in your desk right now? And like I've heard of people that would say like, for this was years ago, before remote working was super normal. People would, do a remote interview and they'd be like, oh, tell me about like what's on your wall in your bedroom or something, before there were all the screens and stuff. And, I think we're trying to stay away from that. So that was a bit of a digression. But yeah, you want someone that's super organized. It would be interesting to see like if someone's personal life is like in disarray, but they're really good at like, running a business. I don't know how you would measure for that, but anyways.
Yeah, I think we've witnessed that people can have two sides of them too. But yeah, it is a pretty good test. Get a little peek into their kitchen junk drawer and see what it looks like. But so let's paint a picture of the worst case scenario. Like, let's imagine what happens if an agency does not streamline their ops, like how does that explode in their face?
Yeah, I mean, so the absolute worst thing is like loss of clients, because it's just like it's a snowball effect, and it doesn't start with loss of clients. It starts with poor communication. It starts with that's one of the biggest things at any remote company. I'm very lucky to work with people in like almost 26 plus countries, and there's different time zones, and there's just different challenges associated with different cultures and things like that. So it all starts with kind of communication. And if you're not getting the full picture of something, you really just need to know how to ask things. But if communication is bad, it will lead to team morale going down. It'll lead to churn. It'll lead, internally, it'll lead to loss of clients. And then ultimately, the worst thing is just having your teammates trying super hard, like, being really integral as people. And then also just like, you can tell that they care, but they're just not getting, like, no matter what they do, if the systems aren't there, it's just going to be energy that's not like wasted, but it's going to lead to burnout. So loss of clients and churn are definitely the worst case scenarios.
Yeah. And to add to that, I'd say like a couple things. I mean, one, it's really hard to run a team without a proper support system. And an operations manager brings a really solid support system. And without that, I mean, think about even from a personal life perspective, our day to day, right? As a human being, we need support systems in different areas of our life. And without a good support system, we fall apart. I mean, I really see teams like that. If you build a team of 30, 40, 50 people and there's no operations, no way, like, and that person in operations, usually that manager, they create that support system for everybody to be heard, to be able to come in and say, hey, I have a problem. And without that, things start falling apart. So, one, just like a lack of support system. And as Drew mentioned, a huge churn rate when it comes to your staff, and they're just not going to be happy. And the other thing, and this is just like a really good example of a client we have right now that we're hiring for a COO position for, is large chargebacks. I mean, this is for an e-com business, but still it's a very, great example of this. Is they're losing, I mean, they're making like millions per month, and they're losing half of that on chargebacks just because they don't have the right systems and processes in place to be able to maintain the right systems. It's like they're not being able to deliver on the product in time, and making sure that they have the product, and it's creating just a whole mess on the customer support side. And then the people aren't happy because they're not able to provide a good customer experience. And it's just like this huge snowball effect from your customers to your team to your business. And then ultimately, even if you are making good sales, that doesn't actually mean your business is healthy or sustainable, right? And that's something else to take in mind, is without operations in the long term, your business is just not sustainable.
All right, so worst case scenario, did you want to add something, Drew? I see you unmuted.
No, I was just going to agree. So true.
I guess worst case scenario, a lot of things can go wrong. So let's start talking about the solutions then. Back to the topic of hiring, as people really are what make the company. Anna, I'll direct this one to you first. Can you summarize what a strong and efficient ops hiring funnel looks like? And then Drew, I would also love to hear from you. Or whoever wants to can kick it off. I know you were just
yeah. Do you mean in terms of like hiring, right, for this position, and like how to create a funnel to actually hire for this role? Okay, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot to cover. My brain's like, there's so many things. We're going to try to like condense it down into a few steps. So one big aspect of it is the sourcing, where you're going to find this person. And honestly, right now, I feel like LinkedIn, I can give you a whole list of amazing places to look for ops people, but at the end of the day, right now, LinkedIn, there's more candidates, substantially more candidates than there are companies offering this kind of position, especially remote position. The second is a very solid vetting process. And I mentioned this in the beginning. You need to have the right questions, steps in place to vet the person to be able to get a good result. So even as an example, having a test project to test for certain strategic questions and how a person would execute on those things. So providing again, that strategic questions, strategic planning. And then finally doing a good background check and like references, right? So reaching out to past clients, employers, and making sure to really understand how were they able to do that in other positions, and if they were successful, and some specific accomplishments as well as struggles. Right. So I think those are just a few things. I mean, I don't want to get too much into it, but sourcing, like really the screening, vetting process, and then towards the end, a test project and background or reference checks could be make a huge difference ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is basically just call Anna and have that sorted. But
I promise that wasn't planned.
no, it's true though. I mean, I think you want to have a relationship with a really strong recruiter and someone that, like, one of the things about being the head of operations or a COO is you need to really protect your time and understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. And the best thing you can do is just understand what you're looking for. And like, if you get to a recruiter with someone like Anna or someone similar at that level, like they understand how to get the funnel to you. So the biggest thing that you can do is just give feedback as to why they're a good fit or not, especially when it comes to cultural fit and also like hard skills, because softer skills are a little bit more difficult to measure for. But ultimately, like, you do a little looking around before you engage in a recruiter. You do a little looking around, you do some word of mouth stuff. I like to go on LinkedIn and just like search for people, do a little headhunting myself. Not that I would necessarily reach out to them, but like you kind of want to see what someone in a similar industry is doing, and like what those operations managers look like. And then you can kind of have something to compare and have in your mind, like, oh yeah, this person would be good, this person wouldn't be as good because of X, Y, and Z. And then when it comes to like the funnel itself, I really do believe, like a call is super important when you're interviewing someone, which would happen pretty much all the time, but also a test project. If you can afford to pay people for the test project when they get to that stage, I think it's really important to do it, because you're showing like, that you value their time, because we've all been on the other side of test projects. And, it can feel kind of demoralizing if you don't get the job or something, you've put in a lot of work to it. So if you can, definitely do, subsidize it to a point. It doesn't have to be a lot. And I also think, just setting expectations, as Anna mentioned earlier, like with the candidate from the beginning, because it's a two-way street. We don't want someone to be like super put out. Like, we really do care about the candidates that we interview at SearchTides and, other positions, jobs that I've been at. And then, lastly, you want to have a hard decision. Like, you do want to get to the point where you have candidates that are coming in and you're like, oh man, this person would be great because of this, this person would be great because of this. And like, it's really also at the same time, like if you can keep a scorecard kind of thing going, you can't like measure everything, but the scorecard, if it's between two people at the end, can be more of an objective view for yourself. And then, there's always going to be like a feeling when you get to the final hiring process, is this the person that I'm going to want to, basically trust my business with? Like, those are all, I think, probably there's some sort of formula, some combination of all that you have to take into consideration.
Would love to add to this, like a couple of things I think as well is, I always say one of the most important steps when hiring for any position, but this one even more so, is the vision. Like, we call it the vision, right? We have a vision form, by the way, we can share. If anybody's interested, please feel free to reach out and I can share that. But ultimately what the vision form is you're sitting down and you're saying, who's my dream rock star candidate? Like, what will they do for the business? What would their background look like? What's the dream, right? What does success look like for this position? And I think putting the time in to do that upfront is so valuable. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs who do run this themselves, which is totally fine, they don't put in the work in the beginning, and then they end up hiring somebody or taking a very long time to hire and realizing that it's because they didn't really figure out what they actually needed before. They were like, oh, I just need these things. They're going to just help me out with this and this. But ultimately, there's so much more. And even when we're doing interviews, the reason why we work the way we do, like so closely and act like a recruitment team to every company that we work with, is because it needs to be a conversation. There needs to be a feedback loop. And so if a client is like, oh my God, this is an amazing candidate, great. But if not, for example, okay, this wasn't the right fit, they came up with, while interviewing a candidate, there was a new requirement or something new that they didn't even realize from the very beginning. And that's so important. Like, the more specific you can really be about what the ideal candidate is, the better and easier it will be to vet. Otherwise, without a clear vision, you're like, well, this person can do it, and this person, I guess, could do it. But it's not about who could potentially do it. It's like, who would be the rock star? So that's kind of one thing I want to add. Just a few quick tips for those people who do want to be able to do this independently, because using a recruiter or an agency like Remotivate is amazing if you have, for example, the finances and you want to just like, okay, I don't want to do this myself. But there are people out there that I've personally talked to, like, oh, I want to do it all on my own. I have the time. A couple cool tips is, one, there's a book called The Who Method. I don't agree with everything, but they do have a pretty solid framework to check out. The second thing is really looking for candidates that do have the same industry background. So if as a marketing agency, for example, you want to find somebody who's done this for a marketing agency. I'm not saying that a person without can't do it, but it really de-risks. It lowers the risk substantially by hiring somebody with that specific background, and finding somebody who's done something similar to what you envision. A great example is, we had a marketing agency that wanted to scale to exit within 5 years. And we hired somebody who was literally exiting an agency that they helped to build, right? So they helped, as a COO, they helped to build, scale, and sell. And we were able to hire somebody with exactly that experience. And that really lowers the risk, because if you're doing it on your own, sometimes you don't know what to look for, right? When it comes to soft skills, like as Drew mentioned, hard skills are a lot easier. Soft skills are a lot harder to really pinpoint. And if you don't have that experience, or you're hiring an ops for the first time, one thing that could really help is really focusing on what you want them to achieve for your business and being able to check if they've done that before for others. So just wanted to add a couple of those things.
And the last thing I'll add, sorry, I know we're on a schedule here, or not, is like, it is probably worthwhile and valuable if this is your first time hiring, basically any position, but especially an operation position, to try to do it like yourself a little bit. Even if you spend like a week or two and just see what's out there, like I would suggest, if you you have the best of both worlds, like try to do a little work on your own, and also reach out to a recruiter if possible, and then kind of like compare notes, because you're not going to reach out to, unless you have like an internal recruiter, it's very unlikely that you reach out to, your recruiter for every single role. Sometimes there's just other roles that are just not necessarily like easier, but they're just not as in depth, and you don't need as long of a search. So like, for example, like a content writer or something like that, depending on, someone that like more of a doer and a producer, you might not need as in depth, but I think it's still really valuable to, like, because as you go through the recruitment funnel yourself, you kind of understand how it works. And then as an operations person, you're like, all right, I actually need to map out that we're going to hire this role, but it's going to take, this long, much longer than I originally thought. And this is like why, and I understand why. So yeah, for an operations role though, it usually is a bit more involved than kind of like a production or doer role.
Yeah, I know, Anna, you were just telling me recently about just like also sifting through all the noise of candidates too. And if you are doing it yourself, some less conventional methods of like finding different candidates, as LinkedIn is overwhelming. And you talked about networking a little bit. I know you've done that not just for candidates, but for business purposes. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that at all, like communities.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think also when you're part of various communities, I think it can also be an amazing help to also connect. So for example, a lot of our clients find candidates through referrals, right? If you're part of a community, I think it can make a huge difference. So for example, like I'm part of a community called GeekX. They're amazing when it comes to, when it comes to HR, or when it comes to even with like financial questions, there's a whole Slack, and they're honestly, it's just giving an example. I think they are amazing for being able to really have support. Now, I think a lot of entrepreneurs know this, but who don't, I really, really highly recommend always joining a community like that, because again, if you can't go out, if you don't have the time to go out and run a whole funnel to find an operations manager, and you're plugged into a community. And the reason why I bring up even GeekX is because they focus a lot on marketing agencies. That's why I think it's super relevant. Somebody might be letting go of their operations manager, or they might know of an amazing operations manager. And not just that, right? Content writers, media buyers, things like that. And you could literally just make a post saying, hey guys, looking for an ops person or looking for a media buyer. They actually do that quite a bit. Like, can you help me out? So I do think that, thank you for bringing that up, Lauren, because I do think that is a really cool way to also hire quickly through referrals.
Great points. I think let's move on to, if you want to add something else, we're going a little over time here, but feel free to chime in briefly.
Let's move on. There are ways to vet clients, or not clients, to vet candidates a little bit quicker, put some Easter eggs in your adverts and stuff like that, but maybe we'll do that in the, like, if time allows at the end, or like do a follow-up.
Yeah, I think we could probably slide that into the next section. So I wanted to go a little deeper into hiring, not just reviewing people's profiles, but also diving into the interview questions when you're face-to-face or virtually face-to-face, as we are now, with potential candidates. So whoever wants to start, let's talk about specific interview questions that can help you find the best ops experts and why you would choose those questions.
Yeah, so I have a favorite question that I like to ask for operations roles, and that question is, I'll pretend Lauren were in here. I'll say, Lauren, would you prefer to build a new building from scratch, or would you prefer to make sure that an existing building does not fall down?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. What's the right answer there? You're making me nervous as a candidate here.
There's not necessarily a right answer, but I think I want to see the thought process into why you choose one thing. So it depends on what your goal is with this hire. So for example, if you have a bunch of systems and you need like an operations manager to make sure that those systems, stay functioning, but they also like can improve a little bit, you probably want someone that it would be more interested in, making sure a building doesn't fall down. If you are building out like lots of new shiny things, you want someone to do the new building. If you need someone to do a little bit of both, you want them to be interested in both.
I used to ask that question, but it's some ops people might see through that though, depending on their level, of course. But I really want to add something here. And I know, Lauren, it's a little bit deviating from your question, but I think it's super important because Drew touched on this a little bit. There is a very key difference in terms of hiring an ops manager versus a leader, more like COO or head of operations. And to make this, because I know we're a bit limited on time, we can cover this in questions. But one of the easiest ways that I explain the difference is an operations manager is focused on the day-to-day and just running the day-to-day of the business, right? They're just steering the wheel, making sure things are moving forward. Whereas a head of operations or a CEO, they're thinking strategically about scale and what the business needs to build to be able to scale to that point, whether that's bringing on new staff or building out new departments or creating systems. So they're more of a strategic thinker versus just running the day-to-day and maintenance mode. Whereas ops is more on the maintenance, like ops manager.
Yeah. And then other questions that I like to ask are anything that I can understand their frame for thinking about, specific scenarios. So what I like to do is say, like, here's 7 things that are happening, order them in priority, how you're going to handle them throughout the day. What are you going to delegate? That. And you just want to see like their process. So anything you can do to get them just really thinking out loud is super important. Crisis management is part of it. And then also just like, I kind of like to find out about their approach to motivating their team, because essentially part of, being a COO or head of operations is leadership. And that's basically like taking the strategy, making it, implementing it, and then motivating your team to do it. So anything you can ask, like, scenarios where your team's demotivated, and you just give them kind of like a scenario and you ask them like, how are you gonna get people excited again?
Yeah.
Am I frozen?
No. Oh, now you are. I'd love to add something to what
Did I freeze? Am I back?
You're back, I think.
You're kind of in and out a little bit. But I wanted to add something to what Drew mentioned is, something that I love to ask when I'm doing interviews for an ops manager or any kind of operational role, ops manager, head of operations, COO. One thing I love to, and I recommend this to all of our clients in the final conversations, bring up an actionable challenge in the business. Okay, here's what's happening with our team, or here's the churn rate, or we want to be launching new services, and ask them how would they go about addressing that challenge or fixing that, or what would their strategy be to this actual problem that you're having. It's like, here are the facts, here's what we're going through, here's the biggest challenge in the business or the biggest fire, go. And then being able to see how they think on their feet, how are they going to respond, how strategic are they going to ask you questions, or are they just going to start responding right away? So there's so many things that I love looking at when I ask that kind of question, because as an example, if somebody just starts rambling the answer, I'm a little bit thrown off. It's like, don't you need more information? Like, how can you just give me the answer without really, truly trying to understand? And a good ops manager tries to first understand the problem as much as they can before trying to give you solutions to the problem. So that's one of the things I love to also kind of throw at them.
Yeah, it's kind of more about how they respond and the whole process behind the response.
Yeah.
Like less about the answer and more about watching how their brain works even.
Yeah, and less about the question too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So like if you could just summarize like the traits in thinking, I know it's pretty general, it's different for each company, but are there any like specific soft skills or mental process traits or even hard things that you're looking for that you could summarize, like 2 or 3 traits, or give you 2 weeks over time?
Yeah, I think ability to adapt quickly is definitely my number one. You got to be able to just like, you got to be able to change, things break, things, need to be built differently in whatever you're doing. So ability to just like roll with the punches and change is a super important soft skill.
Good one.
I was gonna actually say, Lauren, when you asked that, I was like, Drew, just describe yourself.
How would you describe Drew then?
I thought that would be the best way to describe an amazing operations manager. But to answer or to add a couple to this, a flexible leader, really having somebody who knows how to connect with individual leaders within the team or individual team members, I think is important. One method of communication is not going to fit all. So I think that's pretty important. And somebody who knows how to ask the right questions. I think that's actually really hard to find. And that's why I brought that example up from the interviews, is because I want to see people ask me the right questions, not just questions, the right questions. And that's really hard to find in a good ops person.
Anything else to add, Drew? Or shall we go into the contrary of what are the red flags?
Well, I guess the last thing is just you want someone that you can rely on. It's kind of like babysitting. Like, you're not going to leave your kids with, just some random person that's like not reliable. Like, you want someone reliable. You want someone that you're like, okay, I know I said like they could watch this movie, but I actually learned that this movie is like not good for my kids to watch. Like, you need to change. Like, let's put something else on and also handle the backlash from the screaming child. It's pretty similar. You just have to like really be able to, you gotta have like very strong emotional intelligence on one side, because you have to be able to be like, I'm super empathetic, probably a little bit too much, but like I really do I value what my team has to say as well as my managers. And the reason that's important is because like, you have to, like Anna was saying, ask the right questions. So when you're asked to do something, you have to be like the reality. You have to be like the voice of reason many times to the person that is driving the strategy. You have to be like, well, okay, but it's going to take this long, or we can't do it because of this. Like, you are also supposed to be able to not like push back, but you don't want like a yes person. So one of the qualities is being able to like speak your honest opinion and your professional opinion. and not just go along with whatever, because at the end of the, like, then you're going to end up under delivering essentially. So you want proven experience doing this as well. You need to be able to like see, so if you're looking on like resumes and, you know, stuff, you want to be able to see someone that's made change at like, and measurable change through processes, and also have them, when they speak to you, be able to be like, you know, give me an example of a time that you disagreed with your, you know, how something should be and what happened after that.
That's a good one too. I think I know any, go for it, Anna.
No, I was just gonna say one of my clients put it down and put it in such a beautiful way when we hired one of we hired a COO for them, and when we were getting some feedback on like how is everything going, he's like, I love the fact that I can leave for X amount of time, weeks, months, whatever, and the house won't be burnt down when I get back.
Yeah.
The babysitter. I guess any
The
business
best way of putting it, like the house will be there when I get back.
I know I've heard you refer to Remotivate as your baby, and I think any business owner feels the same way. So it's like, yeah, and with a role that's as important as an ops expert, yeah, keep that house upright, no fires, keep it all moving. So let's dive into red flags. Now, those are all the good things. Tell us a little more about what's something you might see or hear during the screening process where you're like, no, next. What's a red flag?
Ooh, I have many. Okay, number one, someone that's like super entrepreneurial to the point where they're like, oh yeah, that's like, I have this side hustle thing going on. Like, that side hustles are cool. I think everyone should have them at some point in their life. Like, maybe always, maybe not. It's up to you really. But like, you're gonna always, the person that's working on the side hustle is probably someone that's an achiever, and that's cool. But like, you really need to understand what that is. If someone mentions a side hustle on their first interview with you, like, that's a red flag for me, because, you know, I don't care about your side hustle. Like, that's cool. And, you know, as I get to know you more, that's awesome. Like, cool. That's great that you're working on this thing, but like, this is the priority. I don't know you all enough yet to like understand that you're able to manage that. So that's one thing. Someone that is not able to show that they have led a team successfully before, and, you know, done something. I think that there is like a very clear stepping stone path for a career in operations. So like, first you would want someone to make sure the house does not fall down before they start making strategic, you know, plans. So someone that has like, I think hiring someone with a background in operations, you have to be very careful about the level that they're actually at. Do you want to like, you need to understand if they are capable of running the whole show, or if they're just gonna babysit essentially. And then I guess the last red flag I have, anything that makes them seem like unreliable in any way. Like, I'm not a good example right now because my internet kind of cut out for a second, but if like they don't have good internet, you know, like that's not good. If they kind of like are flaky, if they're not like proactive, if they don't send a thank you note after meeting with you, like, I don't know, these things all kind of add up. So reliability is probably my number one red flag.
Yeah, those are really good ones. To kind of, well, there's one that I actually wanted to expand on because I think it's such a good point. I've seen a lot of operations managers reach out and apply to positions. And when I start looking in and diving into their experience, they were hired and brought on as a VA that grew into an operations manager. But I think one of the issues with that is, yes, you've probably gained skills, you might have even done a course or two, but ultimately if you were hired as a VA and 2 years later you're an ops manager, that doesn't necessarily mean you know what it takes strategically to grow a business, right? And so, Drew, as you mentioned, it's like babysitting versus actually, you know, taking care of the house and being able to renovate, and right? And so I think that's a huge thing to take into consideration. And what I find as a bit of a red flag as well is that these candidates sometimes oversell themselves. They think because they went so quickly and grew into an ops manager in a company, they're going to do an amazing job at the next company, but that's not always the case. So somebody who's overly confident and has very little experience or only a few years of experience can be a bit of a red flag. The other thing for me, one of the biggest things I think for me personally, when I'm doing an interview with a candidate, especially for an operations position, is when they can't respond to my questions clearly and concisely. Like, if at the end of their response, I don't understand the actual answer, then it does, like, that's just no. And a good ops manager knows how to respond to a question where you understand the answer and in a way that's concise. So they just didn't ramble for 3 minutes straight. And at the end, I'm like, so what do you actually mean by this? Right. So I think that is definitely a red flag for me. And a small one, but I think it's actually something that has come up quite a lot. If you're a remote first company, and at least this is for me a red flag, at the end of a conversation, I ask if there are any questions. And the only question a candidate has is, will you buy me my laptop? I'm like, so that's not remote ready, because usually if a candidate has been working in the remote space, they're familiar with the fact that a company, a normal remote ready, remote first bootstrap business is not handing out laptops. That's not like a typical thing that's happening. And to me, that's saying you've mostly worked in corporate or you've mostly worked in the office, and that just turns me off right away. So those are a couple of mine.
Yeah, I think it's totally cool. That's a really good point. I think it's totally cool for the candidate to ask, but I think it's kind of like a etiquette thing. Like you kind of have to feel out the room and be like, instead of like, will you buy me my laptop? I would probably respond a little bit.
Thing they asked.
I'd respond a little bit better to something along the lines of like, so tell me about like the tools you use, and like, do you guys use Microsoft or Mac, and like kind of easier. And it is important for them to understand like how it works. But yeah, that's another huge red flag. Just any like questions that just make you feel kind of like off or uncomfortable, it's not the move.
Yeah, that's a great point. You have to be comfortable with if there's any response that really throws you off. And this is actually the cool thing about working with a recruiter. You can always come back and say, was this a normal response? So if you're not sure, you can ask a recruiter and say, is this normal? Or was this like, this threw me off, but maybe I'm not as experienced. What do you guys think? Right. So having someone to even ask about if that is a red flag. But I agree, you have to feel comfortable throughout that conversation.
Trusting your gut. The gut isn't just random. It really does detect little red flags and things that you might not be aware of mentally. A good point. I think let's move forward a little bit from the hiring and interviewing process. Unless there's any burning thing you'd like to say before we continue.
I think we're good.
All right. Yeah. So moving into our final topic here, aside from hiring, like you've hired the right people or you already have them on your team, how can you enable them to help your company have operational success and grow? Like what could a company owner do to enable their ops experts to do the best work?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So it's like, what can the company do to make their new or existing operations people more successful?
Yeah. Actually, I think I do have a cool answer for this, or just a quick answer for this is get out of their way. That's the best thing you can do. If you've hired an amazing person, do not micromanage them. Get out of the way and let them do their job. Like, I can't say that enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really helpful. You kind of have to like earn that, I suppose, when you come in. But I think having being like bumpers up is important. Just like have regular check-ins and be available to answer questions. But don't be. This is something you should find out in the interview process, how they like to work. I meet with my boss twice a week minimum. Sometimes it's just like a quick check-in. Other times we go on for the whole time or plus. I think just like having expectations of what is like, just setting expectations is probably the most important thing. Understanding like how you're going to work with different people at your company, whether that be like your direct manager or your direct reports. Also, I mean, there was a time when I was working with it was just during that crazy hiring phase, like I was getting 200 Slack messages like every hour. It was ridiculous. And I think you just want to be a resource to your ops person and be like, okay, here's some strat. Like I consult people and mentor people all day and I love it. But like, if you can have a manager that can do something similar to you, I think it's like really important for me, especially. So, if you can help put up boundaries so that your ops person can actually run the operations, that's cool. So it's a two-way, it's back and forth between the ops manager or COO and kind of their boss. It's, like, okay, here are your expectations. Cool. but this is what I need to do to get those expectations met. So I think communication is super important. I think it's also just be like supportive and be around, and just, infrequent messages like, how's it going? Do you need anything from me? And then like really listen to what they say.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to this as well, it's setting up what success is like. And that's why I mentioned that. I mentioned this in the vision part, like I've mentioned this throughout the conversation around setting expectations. But I think a lot of business owners, they have this vision in their head or in their mind of what, where they want to be. And very often they don't express it correctly. Like I can say that the 90%, I've worked as an operations manager as well. I mean, Drew, you probably can relate to this, but a lot of times business owners, they tell you something and they think you get it, but you don't. You're like, no, I need more information here. And I think that also comes down to being a good ops manager, is also being able to ask the right questions, but ultimately a good support could also be explaining things thoroughly and saying, do you clearly understand what we're trying to do here? Like, what else do you need? What else can I give or provide or explain for you to really, do you really see the vision of what I think success is like here? And do you think this is realistic? Can we do this? Does this make sense? And having that conversation, clarifying as much as possible about what the expectations are, what success is. I mean, I can't say it enough. So many times that I talk to our clients and they say that they're like, oh, well, this person didn't work out. And I ask why. And the answer is, well, they didn't do what I thought they were going to do. And I asked them, like, did you explain that? Well, not really, but I just thought they would get it. Like, no, people don't read minds. Operation managers don't mean that they read minds. So like, yeah, good communication and really pushing for what success is.
Anything else to add, Drew?
I think, I think that's probably a good place to end it with that.
Yeah, I guess let's move on to our Q&A session, as we just have about 10 minutes left. So anyone who has questions, please drop them into the Q&A that you can find. I don't know, it says Q&A, the Zoom app. I see some coming in. And in the meantime, I just wanted to remind you that Remotivate is offering that 15% discount just for attendees on our recruiting services for those of you who book a call by the end of next week. And we have a ton of great ops experts in our network, as well as other professionals. So if you want to learn how you can save that time and money in your hiring, I'll drop a link in the chat now, or into the, can I do one in the Q&A? I don't think it'll let me, but I'll send it to you all via email after the event. Unless, don't know. I'll see if I can do it in the meantime here. But let's take a look at some of our questions as they're pouring in here. See, we have a bunch of questions from Amber, so let's start there. How do you assess remote work readiness when hiring for operations roles other than owning a laptop?
Drew?
Yeah, so I've written about this before at I was doing a blog a couple of years ago, and I've written about a strategy for this. I can put it in the chat later potentially, but what you need to do is you need to plan a test that is very similar to what they will be doing when they work for you for real, and you need to just like I said earlier, plant like Easter eggs. So like you need to say, if you're hiring someone, this is not operations necessarily specific, but it can be applied. If you're hiring someone to find email addresses all day, you need to set a template in like Google Sheets and then explain exactly what you want that person to do in each cell. And then you basically, all you have to do is check their work to see if they followed it 100%. And if they did not, don't talk to them. It's similar for an operations role. Like you can, in your application, you can put in some Easter egg things, like make sure you include the word motivate in your first sentence or variation of it and things like that. And if they don't even look at it. In terms of like, in addition to remote ready, have they worked remotely before? If not, like ask them straight up, like, what do you think will be different working remotely versus not? And how do you plan, have them make a plan you know, if you really like them, but they've never worked remotely before, show me a plan. How are you going to do your day? How are you going to make sure you're in communication? So yeah, I think past experience is probably best.
I guess for me, like if you're doing interviews, there's a couple quick things that you can do to really test for that. So one, I asked them what's the tech stack that they used or built out in the past roles. And when they say like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, okay, how did you manage projects? Like SMS? I swear that's a real answer. I get, or when I've asked like, okay, how did you create SOPs? They ask me, what are SOPs, right? So I find one, tech stack, like asking them, what did they use for project management? And then two, asking them, how did they communicate with their team? There's a huge difference between working in the office versus working remote and remote leadership, and asking regarding communication, both from a technology perspective, as well as what did day-to-day look like when it came to communicating with your team effectively and managing your team effectively. I find that is a huge difference. And the response is like, I can clearly see that a person's either worked successfully in a remote setting or they haven't, based on those responses of communication and tech stack. Like those are huge, huge ones.
Right, that's it. Let's see. Amber has lots of good questions, but let's skip through the others first so we make sure we have time. Let's do Rachel. Can you run a business and just delegate the tasks of an ops manager across your team instead of having one person in charge of that or one person doing it?
Totally, but then you're the ops manager. Congratulations.
You've just
role.
I mean, it's a tough one, because I think ultimately, you know, yes, there are things that other people can do, but there needs to be one person that everybody goes to, or some sort of central person holding the team together. Again, I keep coming back to whoever's, you know, steering the ship, like who's the captain of the ship. There needs to be a captain or there's chaos. So I think, yes, you can delegate a lot of things, but ultimately you need somebody who's going to be a leader, and it needs to be somebody aside from just you, because otherwise you're going to be working in the business instead of on the business.
So we have another question here from Joessa. With your current team setup, how do you deal with cultural differences and time zone differences? Like in a remote setting, it sounds like.
Ooh. When I first started working my current job, we had a 12-hour time difference and sometimes a 13-hour time difference between New York and the Philippines. And it was challenging, but you basically just, you know, depending on where you are, you have to set expectations that you need to be online during these hours, even if it's, you know, not ideal. And then what you can do is install middle managers closer to their time zone, which is essentially what we did. And then in terms of cultural differences, like reach out to experts and talk to people and understand what, you know, in some cultures, yes does not always mean yes. In some cultures, it's rude to do one thing or another, and just like take that time to invest in, you know, yourself to understand, and also just like ask people. And, you know, if you are working with people with cultural differences, you know, after you get to know them a little bit, maybe reach out and say, hey, I have a couple questions. Could you tell me a little bit more about some of your customs and things like this? That's what I would have done.
Those are great.
Nothing to add, by the way. I think Drew did an excellent job explaining that one.
Yeah, I think people just being aware that there can be cultural differences is good to remember, especially when you're just all online. Everyone feels the same. You're in your little Zoom boxes. You have to consider the backgrounds as well. I know I've worked a lot in many years in Asia too, and I had to adapt quite a bit my communication styles and things. Let's see. This one's interesting. Since we talked a lot about how there are too many applicants a lot, what do you do if your job postings are not getting enough applicants?
I would say, well, one thing that we do at Remotivate when it comes to the actual job postings is experimenting with the title. I actually find that a lot of times, if you're not getting enough applicants, sometimes the positioning isn't correct, right? So maybe even trying out different ways of, in terms of the title. So that's one. Second, if it's a free posting, LinkedIn does cut it off at like 50 or 70 candidates. Like there's a limit to if it's a free posting. So setting a small budget, like $5 a day, whatever the minimum is, you're going to get so many candidates, honestly, by setting like a minimum budget. And it's way cheaper than spending on a job board where it's like $300, $400 per position. With the LinkedIn postings, you actually pay per click or something like that. So it's you actually get a much higher return on whatever you're investing. So you'll spend like $50 and you can get like 500 candidates. It's really cool.
So I think we have time for, did you want to chime in, Drew, or no? I guess.
Okay, I think that's all good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Looked like you might have wanted to say something. I think we have time for one or two more questions. So do you have an example of a test project or just the kind of test projects you would do when hiring for operations roles?
Drew, I think
Yeah,
you're
I mean,
great response to this.
yeah, I mean, I think it's really, do I have an exact example that I could send? Probably not, because I think it would be tailored to your business. So what I would do is I would get a piece of paper, write it or type it or whatever, what your challenges are right now in the area that you need to, in one area of your business. And I would then create a scenario and say, this is what's happening. How are you going to tackle it, and put it on them? And that would be like part of the test. The other part of the test would be something very tangible, and it would be so like, for example, one thing that I had to do was we were considering doing courses, like online courses for one of our clients to help them produce them. So I would say, like, put together a proposal for how you would, make an online course. Here's your budget. And then they need to start asking questions. But I think you want to do one which is kind of a thought process, and the other one is something more tangible, which shows their ability to plan strategically.
Nothing to add. That's like I said.
Nice. I think we can slide in one last question. I know we talked about hiring people who maybe haven't worked remotely before, or I know a lot of companies shifted to remote in the past few years. So Joessa is asking, what are the common difficulties faced by an operations manager that is used to working on site and then shifting to full-time remote management setup?
It is so much easier to get in the same room with people so I think you need to set that expectation that it is text can be a wonderful thing, but more times than not, sending a message in Slack or over email, there are going to be way more questions. So it's always best to set the precedent that, like, you should be available during working hours to hop on a call at whatever time, works for everybody at the company or in that department, and just get into the habit of, having actual audio conversations, because it just goes so much further. And then also you got to make sure that they are taking care of themselves on the other side. So there have been days, and we all try to avoid these. I think everyone here is guilty, where you don't leave like your room where you're working, and like if you can make that balance of, hey, we need to hop on a call right now, and then on the other side of it, like, all right guys, like, you just had a call or back-to-back calls, go for a walk around the block. So yeah, that balance is super important. Not sure if that fully answers the question.
I mean, just to kind of add to this, I think, there's also the aspect of what this is, and we brought this up a little bit already, but the concept is, when you're asking really good questions about how this person worked or managed a team, you'll be able to see their experience versus whether it's in the office or remote. If you're a remote first company, you'll really feel the difference based on their responses. And it really comes down to how they communicate. How do they do meetings? How often are they doing meetings? What technology are they using? Like, is it phone calls and SMS, or, are there proper tools in place? There's things like that where you'll feel a really big difference if you are a remote first company hiring somebody that has done that more in the office. And I always say, yes, you can find an amazing ops manager that potentially could transition into the remote first space. but there's a huge risk entailed in that, right? That you don't know if they will do that successfully, if they'll be comfortable. Even if they've worked from home during the pandemic, it's still very different than working for a remote first company. And that's where I think, having an interview and talking through how their management style, their communication style, their tech stack, how they did things before, to be able to see if that aligns with what you're doing now in your business, and if you feel like they can really merge with what you're doing. So again, not exactly to answer, but it is important from an employer's perspective when hiring and understanding those differences.
All right, so I get on that note, we'll wrap up here, but any final like hot takeaways, anything you'd like to leave people with before we close off the call?
I mean, for me, I guess, please hire an operations manager as soon as possible. I guess just for some context here, people ask me, when is it time to hire an operations manager? As soon as you have like a good steady income in the bank and you can dedicate even a few $1,000s, it doesn't have to be, a 100K role. You can start with somebody that's just helping you with day-to-day management, and that already is going to make a huge difference, or day-to-day maintenance of the service or product. And so I would say hiring somebody sooner than later, versus a lot of companies that come to us, they're already, 40 million, 50 million and above or even more. I think we worked with a company at 150 million that did not have like a COO, which to me is, but hire as soon as possible, and then continuously bring on higher level leadership over time. So you do need somebody at that junior ops stage, you need somebody at that mid-tier stage, you need somebody at that top level stage. So those are all important, but hire as soon as possible.
Great point. Anything to add, Drew?
Yeah, and I'll just agree basically by saying start the process of hiring an ops person as soon as it makes sense for you and it is possible, but do take your time in finding the right person to do that as well. And then you might be thinking like, well, we've been running it this way forever. Why do I need to change anything? Like, that is the exact mindset that is not going to let you get where you want to go. So do take the time to vet the right person, and I think you'll be surprised in a good way how much this person can benefit, your, not only like your work life, but you're just going to feel a lot freer in general after the onboarding process is sorted. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much to both of you. It's been a really interesting chat. I hope everyone has many things on their to-do list to take away from this. And I will do our very quiet virtual round of applause that none of us can hear from our attendees. And thank you so much, Anna and Drew, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure. And thanks so much for hosting, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.